Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Patrick Lencioni said, "Not finance, not strategy, not technology. It is teamwork that remains the ultimate competitive advantage, both because it is so powerful and so rare." Well, on today's episode, we're going to talk about how the world's best teams win and how yours can too, the big shift from leadership to teamship, the impact of conflict avoidance on a team's effectiveness, and more. My guest is an entrepreneur, a #1 New York Times bestselling author, global thought leader, keynote speaker, and one of the world's most influential and sought-after executive team coaches who challenges the way teams work to achieve breakthrough results. His early career included leadership roles at Deloitte and Starwood Hotels. His latest book, Never Lead Alone, provides a practical research-based roadmap for what it takes to be a high-performing team. His columns are regularly published in Harvard Business Review, The Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fast Company, Fortune, and Inc. magazine. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Ferrazzi Greenlight and the man who is committed to making a positive impact on society, Keith Ferrazzi. Keith, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Jay, what a beautiful introduction. Thanks so much. And I'm excited to meet your audience.
Absolutely. Well, I am super excited for them to meet you and for this incredible conversation today. So let's dive right in. I thought a starting point just to get us started would be for you to share with all of us what your favorite thing is about yourself.
Oh my, that's an interesting question. I feel like what I've emerged as a critical component of my brand to my friends and to those who get to know me pretty quickly is my willingness and comfort in going deep about myself to others quickly. I learned a long time ago that each and every one of us has a roadmap in front of us of success, aspiration. That journey will be either 0 or 10 based on the relationships that we have and the people opening doors for us. We don't have time to screw around. We've got to meet people with excessive generosity. And when we do, we've got to open our hearts authentically to them so that we deepen that connection as quickly as possible. And in this day of hybrid and virtual work, all the more important to be deeply intentional and get to it when it comes to deepening relationships. So, my ability to be authentic and vulnerable about what's going on in my life, inviting people into relationship with me.
That is beautifully said, and I'm so glad that you pointed that out because likewise, that's something that I feel is so important, and I'm wearing a shirt today due to our conversation around listening. And I have found that the deepest conversations happen when we're using curiosity to explore, and that we're willing to open our hearts and open our minds and be vulnerable.
Yeah, well, let's use this as a quick coaching moment for the folks listening.
Sure.
Listening, of course, is a critical component to deepening a relationship. You've got to absorb what people are sharing, who they are. Curiosity, of course, needs to come from your soul that makes one want to extract from an individual all those beautiful tidbits that make them who they are. But the way to do that is actually sharing deeply. So there's a practice that we talk about in the book. The book, Never Lead Alone, is based on how do you develop the kind of team, and I'm going to get to it in a moment. Team isn't people who report to you. Team are a group of people that collectively you share a mission to achieve something extraordinary. And you happen to be the person that brought that team together. They could work for you. They could not work for you. They could be VIPs and in a network of individuals that also have a shared mission. That team has to quickly come together and have a commitment to what I call co-elevation, a commitment to a mission and a commitment to each other. The base of it is a deep relationship, an authentic, caring, celebratory, I have each other's back relationship. Every one of the chapters in the book has a hero and a set of practices. And the practice of personal professional check-in is a beautiful, simple practice where you show up with a group of individuals or a single individual, and you can get that group of individuals to share where they're struggling and where they may be in need personally and professionally. The way you do it is by laying the framework out for yourself. If I were to try to enlist a relationship with you as a listener, I would say on a personal basis, I've been struggling lately because, of my 6 boys, which I know is its own shocking thing, of my 6 boys, my youngest has been really struggling with mental health. He came into our lives through foster care, a horribly abusive childhood, and he's never learned to trust. And unfortunately, through his own actions, he's been disassociated with the family, and it's broken my heart. And our condition to have him fully supported is to get some mental health support. We thought that was going to happen, and recently he decided against that, and it's crushed us. And I could go into that conversation as deeply and as authentically, but I could also do it quickly. I'm willing to wear my heart on my sleeve and bring you into that conversation. Now, if I shared something like that, and then I asked you, what are you struggling with these days, and how can I be helpful, right? Game changing, instantly game changing, because now I'll hear about your mom in assisted living, or the fact that you've just moved jobs and your spouse is feeling neglected. And like there may be all of these things going on in people's lives, but we've got to be able to accelerate our ability to get to us as quickly as possible in the world that we're living in today. So that's a roundabout long answer, but the idea is we've got to get good at the practices of creating us, of creating team, of creating a group of people that won't let each other fail.
Ooh, that is so good. And, as you were sharing, and thank you for sharing that with all of us, it brought up something that I'm working through right now and struggling with. So I lost my father in July of last year. My wife's mother just very recently passed away. So that dynamic and learning how as a couple to work through death, how to work through changes like that, emotions, right? The trauma involved in that's deeply challenging for me right now, and managing those emotions. And so it's an interesting thing to work through, but you share, I share, it opens up the conversation and it allows us to go deeper quickly.
You and I could spend the rest of this session, and frankly, I'm like drawn to spending the rest of this session having this dialogue about how I lost my father and what my experience has been, and where I have found a lift in the energy. So look, this is I hope you all who are listening can start to shift your mindset that being vulnerable, putting yourself out there, is not weakness. It's in fact not only power, but it's a beautiful invitation to others to create us, to create something that's meaningful, to create team, to create tribe. And that's the foundation of a high-performing team. And in anything that you do, you've got to create that psychological safety, that sense of us, that sense of collectivism. And there are simple practices that you do, that when you do these practices, one of these days you'll wake up and you'll be like, whoa, that doesn't seem weird anymore. I show up at meetings with people and we all do a quick energy check. Where is your energy on a scale of 0 to 5 and what's bringing it down? And all of a sudden the group is bonded. Now let's get to work. Like we're bonded, we trust. Now let's get to work. Let's tell each other the truth. Let's let's hold each other accountable. Let's not let each other fail because we love each other and we want to be supportive of each other. That's real leadership. And it's a shift from having all the burden on your shoulders to you being better at cultivating a team that takes on some of that burden for itself. The shift from leadership to teamship.
Amazing. And we're going to be talking more about those shifts. And my friends, for all of you that are watching and listening right now, we are obviously talking about Never Lead Alone. What a phenomenal book. We'll obviously provide a link to this as well as some additional information that I think is going to be important for each and every one of you and how it's going to help you out in being a better leader and that transition from leadership to teamship, right? And we'll talk more about that here shortly. But so, Keith, I would love it if you could tell us a bit about your upbringing, but here's what I'd like to do. If you could tie that to how your upbringing influenced your perspective on leadership and the importance of collaboration in achieving success. So if you could tie those two together for us with a story about your upbringing, that would be greatly appreciated.
What a provocative set of questions you're throwing out at me. I love it, and thank you for this kind of guidance. So first of all, I was brought up in very poor southwestern Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, back in the 70s when the steel industry was crashing. My old man was unemployed for years at a time. My mom had to become a cleaning lady. I had to go work at the local country club to make $20 carrying golf clubs, which was the same amount of money my mom made cleaning houses. So this was a pretty poor, destitute family at a very bad time. Now, the first thing I want you to recognize is that it incited in me a mission. I was going to grow up and I was going to fix American manufacturing. That was my goal. Now, I didn't know how it was going to happen. I thought I was going to be in politics. I thought, I can be governor of Pennsylvania, I can be president of the United States, and I'm going to fix American manufacturing so families don't have to suffer like we did. As I started to evolve and understanding what was really going on back in Pittsburgh at the day, what was going on was this. There was an industrial 100-year business of the steel industry that had become lethargic and arrogant. And there were new ways of working that were being created. And those new ways of working came from the academic community, people like Drucker, Deming, Duran, names that are not as important, but they came up with a philosophy that frontline workers iteratively improving their work. Just think about yourself in your own leadership in business. If your frontline people are deeply committed to constantly improve the way that the customer experience, the way of the product, if they're constantly doing that, then we will achieve great things together. Now, the American industry didn't believe it, but the Japanese did. They picked up this philosophy of Kaizen, Six Sigma, TQM, empowerment, and they brought it to Japan and they kicked America's butt in manufacturing. And the reality is that we looked at newspapers at the time and people were screaming about protectionism, et cetera. But the reality is there was the arrogance of American industry against the ingenuity and the creativity and the leaning in philosophies of the Japanese. Now, why do I share that with you? Because I found out along the way that we're now at another inflection point in the way we work, in the world and how it works with AI and technology. And I don't want you to be like that steel industry. I want you to be constantly open to imagining new ways of working, new ways of opening up productivity and improvement for yourself. Now, when I was a kid, what I learned early on, because I had these great dreams, remember, to be a politician, and yet I didn't know anybody. Nobody in my family had gone to college, right? How does a kid in destitute poverty rise up to that kind of aspiration? And what I realized is I didn't have a network. There was no nepotism that could grant me anything. But what I learned was that people along the way who I built relationships with, authentic, generous, caring, real relationships, that these individuals could open doors for me. That's what became powerful to me. Knowing that I could create my own nepotism through the relationships that I built. And that's what happened. There was a woman at the golf course, her name was Mrs. Poland. And there's a wonderful long story I can tell if you care to hear it, about how as a little kid, Mrs. Poland took me under her wing and what that was about. But she introduced me to the local congressman in the community. She got me a mentor that helped me get into speech and debate and helped me achieve things I would have never been able to achieve, that got me into Yale University, that opened doors to a multitude of things that I didn't have available to me otherwise. And the reality is that each and every one of you who has a dream can find a path to success through opening relationships and opening doors, including opening the doors and relationships today of a small group of people that we can call a team that won't let each other fail. A critical importance of all of this.
Why did Mrs. Poland do that for you?
Oh, that's such a great question. So, I asked Mrs. Poland that years after she had given me those introductions to the congressman and my life had begun to flourish. I said, Mrs. Poland, why in the world did you help me? So let me tell you the answer, and I'm going to step back. My old man used to say something to me, which was, Keith, show up at the golf course a half an hour early. Now, remember, I go to the golf course, Latrobe Country Club, because I'm a poor kid. I'm working there. I'm making $20, and I get the name pulled out of a hat to have Mrs. Poland as my golfer. Great. I go around golfing with caddying for her for one session. I make $20. And she calls to the caddy master and says, hey, I'd like to have Keith again tomorrow. We do the same thing. She goes, hey, I'd like to have Keith again tomorrow. This is such a big deal. This is game changing for my family. Sometimes I would sit up there at the country club and I'd get out once a week. My mom was making $20 a day. Now I'm making $20 a day. This was amazing. Now, what I didn't realize was because my father forced me to show up at the golf course a half of an hour early, in his mind, it was just about hustle and showing up and being prepared. But what ended up happening is because I was there, I was walking around bored, nobody else was there, and I was noticed where the pins were placed, how the greens were cut. I ended up having better information than the average caddy. And as a result, when I showed up with my own inevitable hustle, because I really needed that job, combined with this extraordinary information for my golfer, Mrs. Poland, what Mrs. Poland told me years later is, Keith, you took 2 strokes off my golf score. That's why I helped you so much. And that's the lesson that I learned. The light bulb turned on. When there's a person of prominence or importance that you want to build a relationship with, you need to show up with excessive generosity. You need to show up in service. People don't have time for you unless you have figured out how you can help them. And that's the first step. And if you do that in your life and you show up with that kind of mindset that you're there to be of service and you're there to be of such excessive service that people pay attention and they mind you for it, then it will open doors. Now, when you do that, as I talked about earlier, you've got to show up as your authentic self, to be authentic and to be you and to be caring and to share what you're going through and ask other people what they're going through. Now you solidify a real relationship. And it's those real relationships that are loyal and open doors. Just like if I had been born into wealth, though a family member might help me, that's called nepotism. Well, in this case, nepotism was given to me through Mrs. Poland and the relationship that I created. And that's available to you. Similarly, if you're a leader today and you've got a group of individuals that you want to create great things together, your job is to be of service to that team, to get 150% out of that team, and to shift from you being the controller of that team to them making a social contract to achieve great things together. And that's the shift from leadership to teamship that we can get into. So look, this is a long way around it, but that's where my background ultimately shows up in what I do today.
Brilliant. So you talk a lot about relationships and building relationships, creating value and so forth in your book, Never Eat Alone. And what I'm curious is if you could maybe connect some through lines, because there definitely are some, connect some through lines from Never Eat Alone to Never Lead Alone.
Absolutely. So in Never Eat Alone, I'm talking about how you as an individual can open doors and create relationships and generate the kind of loyal connections that will create abundance for yourself. That's in Never Eat Alone. My next book was called Who's Got Your Back? I started to study how small groups of people who commit to having each other's back can be transformative in each other's lives. That became the tipping point of what I started to realize is the power of team. Not just individual networks, but the power of team to achieve disproportionately greater things. As I migrated over 20 years of research on high-performing relationships, I realized there's three layers of a high-performing team and high-performing relationships. And that's what I wanted to convey in this new book, Never Lead Alone. At the foundation layer are many of the things I've talked about for a lifetime. How do you accelerate the depth of connection and loyalty with a group of individuals? How do you celebrate each other to give each other energy and to give each other strength? And how do you create a commitment among a group of people to be of service to each other? That's the foundational layer. The next layer of a high-performing team or a high-performing group of individuals is the willingness to use the psychological safety that's built down at the bottom relationship layer and go hard with each other. This is where strong friendships and relationships hold each other accountable, tell each other the truth, kick each other in the butt, lift each other up. This is the layer of performance. And so often people have weak foundational layers of relationship. And then when they get to this next layer, they're conflict avoidant. They're overly polite. They're unwilling to push and challenge and get the best out of each other. That layer is the most important layer, that middle layer where you're driving high degrees of performance. Now, you as a leader, it's one thing for you as a leader to give feedback. What I wanted to teach you in Never Lead Alone is how do you get your team to give each other feedback? How do you get your team to hold each other accountable? How do you get your team to own the responsibility to lift each other up, give each other critique, criticism, energy, support, celebration? All of that is what Teamship's about. And you need to lead differently if you want to be in the middle of everything, hub and spoke to everything, running around exhausted playing whack-a-mole, or you want to elegantly lift your team up to meet you in leadership. That's when what I call co-elevation. A team of high performance co-elevates each other. They collaborate and they push each other higher. There's the third layer at the top, which talks about the world that we're living in today of abundant technology and how do we adopt what I call 21st century collaboration. It's that layer at the top that realizes that you can team out in the world we're living in today. You can have team members all over the world who come in and out of your team. They don't have to report to you. You don't have to pay them, but you can be much more bold, inclusive, and bigger than you would ever imagine as a small business person by adopting 21st century collaboration techniques. So those are the three layers, but it's that foundation layer that really builds the bridge from Never Eat Alone to Never Lead Alone. And then there's that second layer of high performance, which I've evolved over 20 years of how do you get the most out of a group of people committed to each other's success.
Okay, so you've answered the question then, and if you need to give some additional clarity around this, please do. But I'm hearing this, and I'm pulling some threads here. What is Teamship, right? So the definition of that, and then primarily, how does it differ from conventional leadership? So you've answered the question, but I want to give some clarity to our listeners. Because as they're going through the book, right, you do such a great job. You start, you give the examples, you tell great hero stories throughout the book with great exercises. But definition of Teamship, and if you could share with us when the seeds of the word itself, when Teamship first started to enter your consciousness.
Yeah, so Teamship started to come into my consciousness. I have an organization that does executive team coaching. We work with some of the largest, most prestigious executive teams in the world and the Fortune 50. We also work with startups. We work with newly forming organizations. that are just disrupting, doing extraordinary work. So we have a pretty broad scale coaching organization. And it was through my coaches, actually, that one particular woman, Kim, who was really quite clever, that she came up with this idea that what we were advocating for was a new form of leadership that expects more of the team. And she actually put the name on the table, Teamship, from the early beginning. And I thought that was so brilliant. But as a leader, as soon as you say leader, there's this responsibility on our shoulders. First of all, there's this belief that leaders lead people to report to us. And the reality is that for you to achieve extraordinary things, you've got to create followership more than be a leader, in that you've got to enlist people to your mission. Those people may have nothing to do with your organization. They may have nothing to do with anybody's sense of control or accountability. They have to be a group of people that you're able to onboard into your mission, into your shared mission. I often say that the first person that you invite into your team, you're inviting them into their team. And so how do you bring somebody into a new collective team? So that's the first step. And then the question is, how do you shape and form that team to have a social contract that's different than you having full responsibility of running around taking care of everybody? How do they take care of each other? The definition of teamship is moving from a hierarchical view of getting things done to the team stepping up and being responsible for the mission and each other. So that's both on the soft stuff, caring about each other, caring about lifting each other's energy up, celebrating each other. It's also the hard stuff, holding each other accountable, giving each other feedback, etc.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. So the book goes through 10 big shifts, and what I'd like to do is there are really 3 that I'd like to focus on, and you've touched on this a bit, but I want to start with conflict avoidance. This one is a huge one, right? We know that, well, we don't all know this, but one of the things that I've certainly discovered through my own experience in coaching is that when we avoid conflict, it affects everything we do, right? It affects team effectiveness, it affects relationships. So talk about conflict avoidance and what we can do within an organization to start to open those types of conversations and why it has such a dramatic impact on team performance.
What I'm probably most proud of in the book is the research we've done over 20 years. What are the practices of high-performing teams? So the book, as Jay, you were talking about, it starts with every chapter, 10 shifts that a team needs to make. The one we're talking about right now is the shift from conflict avoidance to courageous conversations. When a team can move from conflict avoidance to courageous conversations, it radically improves the outcomes of the team. And unfortunately, the average team is conflict avoidant. Our diagnostics, and there's diagnostics throughout the book, our diagnostics show that the average team on a scale of 0 to 5 is somewhere in the low 2s in terms of its ability to courageously challenge each other, particularly when it's risky to do so. Very, very low levels of courage on teams. So what I've observed and what we have in the book are a series of practices that high-performing teams do. So there's this one thing that I call a candor break. A candor break is when in the middle of a debate or a dialogue that's going on, you pause and you say, we'd like to do a candor break here. Now, if we just said to a group of people, what's not being said in the room that should be said, you'd probably hear crickets. But if on the other hand, you say, okay, we're now going to do a candor break. The intention of this next 5 minutes is to step up to our commitment to each other, that we won't let each other fail, step up to our commitment, that we'll share courageously. And we want everybody to go into groups of 2 and answer the following question. What needs to be said in the room right now that's not being said? Write it down in that group of 2. And then let's come back into the main room and share what we wrote down. That act of taking the culture of a courageous team and turning it into a simple assignment increases psychological safety by 85% and leads you to the level of courage that on a scale of 0 to 5 isn't 1.9 or 2, but it's actually in the high 3s. People are courageous when they're assigned to be courageous. So a simple practice in a group of people talking can be game-changing in terms of hearing the truth. Now, just because you hear the truth doesn't mean you have to do anything with it. You're still, if you're running a business or it's your initiative, you can still choose what you activate on. But your cowardice in hearing the truth, or your lack of courage to keep that truth quiet, is what's going to make you mediocre. You've got to have robust debate and dialogue in the room, and then you make bold decisions from that. Does that help, Jay?
Wow. That helps tremendously, and what a powerful question to ask. So thank you for that. And I just want to mention to everybody, the book is filled with exercises just like that that really bring each of these 10 shifts to life for you, something that you can begin applying immediately. So that's a great example.
I think we have 32 practices through the book, 10 chapters. Each one has a few critical practices. Every practice is as simple as that. They've been practices that I've observed in teams like Jeff Bezos's team from Amazon that, as we all know, has really crushed it in terms of its high performance. And you can then pick and choose from these practices and what you want to breed into the kind of groups that you're a part of. And I say a part of because you don't even have to be an ordained leader today to bring these practices into a team. You could be a member of a team and you could say, hey, I just read this book. And that's what it's intended to do. It's really intended to be a workbook. Hey, I just read this book and there's this cool practice called an energy check, which it seems really lovely, and it helps to solidify the commitment that a group of people working together has to each other. Let's do that practice. What do you think? Somebody will say, yeah. Or a candor break to make sure that we can all make sure that the right data is on the table so we can make bolder decisions. Or a stress test. And anyway, so I can keep going. These practices are things that even you as a member of the team can make a suggestion and bring those to the team in service of the team's success.
Fantastic. Now, I want to talk about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So I would love it if you would share with us from that particular shift, speak to the importance of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and give us an example, right? Again, you give a hero's story for every single shift, but speak to that, and maybe you can speak to it from a personal experience, either working with a client or something that you've experienced in your own life, and how important that is for Teamship.
Boy, you're really picking the lightning rod topics, aren't you? I love it. So look, we're in a world today where the DE&I agenda is rather controversial. I'm not sure when you're listening to this podcast, but as Jay and I speak, the election has just been had. There are a number of people out there who are dialing back their initiatives on DE&I. And it's interesting because I think that, well, in researching this book, I interviewed 26 different leaders of diversity, equity, inclusion. Mm-hmm. And I asked them the question, because look, you mentioned Lencioni at the beginning of the conversation. He wrote the book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, 20 years ago. It heavily influenced me and got me down this path of research that I've been doing for 20 years. But that book is 20 years old. And so I wanted to make sure that this research was the current embodiment of what teams are facing. Virtual and hybrid work, DE&I. These are all topics that weren't around 20 years ago. The volatility and the need for agile in the workplace. These things weren't talked about then. So on DE&I went and talked to a bunch of DE&I leaders, and I said, what would you do if you had a team that you were coaching and you wanted them to be the most shining star example of DE&I that existed? And it's interesting because they didn't have answers. Most DE&I initiatives are enterprise-wide initiatives for equity. They're trying to gain a sense of equity in an organization, and there's metrics and there's programs around it. But what was missing, I felt, which is, why does DE&I impact the success or the failure of a team and its work performance? So that's what we started to study. So the first thing is to note that the chapter of DE&I in this book only has a small portion of what we learned. The first thing that we learned is the chapter we were just talking about. It's about inclusion. Do you realize that the average meeting of 12 people, only 4 people say that they're heard? So if you're going to have a meeting with a group of individuals, I promise you, you're not getting full inclusive voices into the room. And you might say, well, I don't care about all of the voices. Some of them aren't as good as the others. But why would you ignore the data? I came from market research I was a marketer. I was the head of marketing at Starwood Hotels. When we birthed the W Hotel chain or the Heavenly Bed, we did market research and we wanted all the data on the table so we could make bold decisions. You as a leader need to have all of the opinions on the table so you can make bold decisions. And then what I also found is that most leaders don't realize the power of getting diverse opinions. Diverse opinions allow you to think more boldly because it's outside of the framework that you would have thought of yourself. So I want to get diverse opinions on the table. I want to hear them fully, and I'm not going to create consensus. Not everybody has a vote, but from that bold input, I can land the plane on a bold decision that has real impact into the business. That's what we learned. So in chapter 3 of the book, when we're talking about the courage of candor and making sure all voices are heard, that's an important part of DE&I is inclusion. There's another piece of DE&I, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Belonging. We want everybody to feel psychological safety, feel that they belong. That comes from your ability to create that relationship layer we were talking about. So here we are. By the time we get to the chapter of DE&I, we've already embraced belonging, we've embraced inclusion, and we've made it important to the work itself. The chapter that we get into on DE&I was really interesting. It had us start to understand what is the sense of sameness among a group of people, and what's the sense of otherness. To understand how we all feel other, whether I might look like a white male stereotype with privilege coming from an Ivy League school, and that has a sense of judgment on your part for what that means. On the other hand, if we were to ask each other, okay, Keith, when did you ever feel other? Well, I could speak to being a poor kid in Pittsburgh, growing up in a rich school, feeling shame and other by virtue of my economic position. And then I can share with you how in my early political career, wanting to be in politics and then discovering myself that I was gay, and all of a sudden, again, feeling other. Now that's a bit of a curveball perhaps for you who saw a white privileged male, but now recognize perhaps that I have some empathy for otherness, right? So these are wonderful discussions that teams can have. And I give you guidance in the book for how do you have conversations of otherness and sameness to further create a sense of empathy, belonging, connection among a team so that you can get the most out of this diverse, beautiful group of humans that you have.
So I have to ask the question because of timing and because of where we are right now with a new administration and the changes that they are putting forth in regards to DEI. I would really appreciate it if you would just share your initial thoughts and opinions on that, not to go down a political path, but just general thoughts where we are right now, decisions that are being made from an administrative perspective, and how is that, do you think about how that's going to impact the work that you do, the work that I do, companies that we engage with? Just speak to that briefly. I'm sure we could talk about that for a long time, but
yeah, 100%. Well, first of all, I do have a sense of sadness that individuals who may consider themselves other may right now be hearing a message of disenfranchisement. And that makes me sad. I mean, I empathize with being other. I have 6 boys. I have, of my children, African-American, Chinese, Mexican of descent. And I really get sad when I see people who feel that their otherness is being ostracized. Now, that's a sadness. That's a personal opinion. But let me say where I think we are from a business perspective. If we're going to keep the richness of a diverse population that America is based on, and that business has, I think, have grown to benefit from, we've got to work it into the work. And that's why I feel that the book that I've written helps us preserve the importance of inclusion by virtue of, if we have more diverse and inclusive voices heard, we will have bolder, more innovative solutions. And we need that today. If we feel a sense of belonging, we can accelerate teams building trust. So we've got to learn how to create belonging in organizations for all people all over the world as we live in diverse teams that are richly global. How do we make sure that people feel quickly in belonging, right? That's good for collaboration. That's good for psychological safety. That's good for the work. So I think that my humble opinion will be, for the next few years, I'm going to continue to be a zealot advocate for the inclusive agenda, for the belonging agenda, and I'm going to do it in service of the work, because nobody can deny that. If we can show the metrics that this work of improving the inclusion, the equalization of voices, and the allowance of diverse populations coming together to create something bigger, bolder, and more exciting, that's what I'm going to focus on.
Beautifully said. Thank you for that. So I have one final question for you, Keith, and then an ask. So here's my final question to you. What is the most difficult decision that you've had to make in the pursuit of the person who you are today? The most difficult decision.
Early on in my life, as I mentioned already, I had shame associated with being poor and wanting to achieve great things and be in community with wealthy, important, exciting people, but I was poor and felt other. I've had shame associated early on being, brought up in a Catholic, conservative, Pittsburgh blue collar background, and all of a sudden finding out my sexuality was not congruent with what my family felt was ethical. And I wanted to continue to remain a Christian while at the same time embrace who I was in myself. Look, I learned that I had to create a community around myself that allowed me to thrive, that held me accountable, but also lifted me up, loved me for who I am and was, and gave me the courage to continue to level up every year 30% in my leadership, in my competencies, in my ambitions, constantly leveling up. But I wouldn't have been able to do it without a tribe. And I think the courage of moving from believing that it was all on my shoulders and I had to do it myself, which was a lonely, scary place to be, to embracing a group of people, whether it's the team that I'm talking about and I write about in the book, or whether it's the team of your self-made family. Jay, I was talking to you a little bit about it earlier. That journey I made is a journey that I put into a roadmap. We started a new program called Beyond Connections, and we bring in a cohort of 100 people at a time, and those 100 people go through an 8-week journey to totally reboot the practices and the mindsets of their relational competencies. They get it put into coaching pods where they become each other's lifelines. They tell each other what their dreams are, and they coach each other during that 8-week period to rewire how they manage relationships, how they invite in teams, how they become leaders with or without the authority that they have. So I'm really proud of that. I mean, it's something that, it's been 20 years. I've never had a consumer product before. It's been 20 years, and I've done all of this organically for myself. And I've done it for teams, But I really wanted to figure out, how do I bring that same journey that I went on myself, that seeker journey? How do I bring that to a broader group of people? So I'm really proud of that. And I think that was the choice that I had to make early on and that you have to make as you're listening. Don't think you have to do this yourself. You can only do it with and through others. So the question is, who is that co-elevating team that has your back?
So good. So for everyone that's listening right now, for those that are interested in Beyond Connections, they can find out more about this by going to your website.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You can go
Fantastic.
to beyondconnections.com. You can go, we'll put some stuff in the show notes, I'm sure.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. And here is my ask. I would love it if you would give all of us and me one challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge us to do starting today, please?
I want you to identify 2 people who are critical or could be critical to your achievement of great success in your life. And one of them is an aspiration, and one of them is in your sphere and knows of you today. I do this thing called an RQ score, where everybody is rated in a 0, I don't know you, to a 5, which is they're a lifeline. There are probably people in your network that are 2s and 3s, acquaintances and bare acquaintances, who, if you really started investing more in them, getting to know them, being more of service, that relationship could open doors for you. There may be some people out there as well that you don't know, but if you really think about it, using the tools of reaching out with generosity, reaching out and thinking of ways that you can be of help or of service to somebody, they could come into your universe. And then as you continue to get to know them and build those authentic relationships, they could be door openers for you that will be game changing. So, that's it. I mean, to me, I want you to start to activate that team. But what I'm suggesting is it's not the team that you're familiar with today. It's the team that you wish you had for tomorrow. And it's chapter 1 in the new book of really redefining what a team is. But I want you to start making those small steps.
That is fantastic. And I hope all of you that are watching and listening right now are saying these 2 words, challenge accepted, and get to work on that. Keith, I want to thank you so very much for joining us on Business Minds Coffee Chat. What a brilliant conversation. Thank you for exposing your heart, your knowledge, your wisdom, and just bringing your true authentic self to this conversation. I really appreciate you, and I'm grateful for you.
You just gave me a beautiful hour. Thank you so much. My blood pressure is lower for talking to you. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad to hear that. And for all of you, I want to thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take just a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps us expand our reach and attract amazing guests just like Keith. And to listen to more podcasts, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button. And until next time, my friends, keep learning, keep growing, do yourself a favor and go out today and pick up a copy of Never Lead Alone. And please apply the lessons you learn in this book. And until next time, take care and we will see you soon.